Well, this is a live look at the Capitol in Salem as lawmakers are heading into the final month of this year's legislative session. They have until June 29th to wrap things up, and that includes one of the biggest priorities for this session, passing a new statewide transportation package. The Oregon Department of Transportation has been sounding the alarm about its financial woes for years. The goal this session is to basically overhaul how transportation is funded in Oregon. No small task. And while the development of the package has been ongoing, so far there's no publicly released bill or package of bills to meet that goal. And the clock is ticking. The task of getting the package together falls on the Joint Transportation Committee. But lawmakers have gotten creative, we'll call it, with the process. You're looking at a meeting of the Joint Committee on Transportation Reinvestment. Same members as the Joint Transportation Committee, but with that new fancy name. Now, the new, air quotes, new committee was created last month. Why? Because it does not have the same internal deadlines for moving legislation, a legislative loophole, if you will. But despite those shenanigans, we have gotten some hints about the transportation funding package taking shape. They released a conceptual plan about 2 months ago that we told you about. The plan then was to raise nearly $2 billion every 2 years by hiking the gas tax along with just about every other car-related tax or fee you can think of, and adding some new ones like a pay-per-mile fee. Now, most of the money would go into the State Highway Fund, which is doled out to ODOT and local transportation agencies to pay for core operations in road maintenance. A smaller portion of the revenue would be set aside for big road projects like the Rose Quarter I-5 expansion. But after that plan came out, things got quiet. And then, late last month, the committee co-chairs, Democratic Senator Chris Gorsuch and Representative Susan McLean, sent a letter to other legislative leaders with a progress report. It reiterated most of the list from the prior framework, but it added a couple more ideas that are being tossed around, including taking another stab at a legislative version of a cap-and-trade program, and maybe even winding down the DEQ emissions testing.
It's a little bit older, and as we were doing the package, we were just working on trying to see if that was something that would save money, if we could invest it in something that was more potent than that particular program, but that's about it. That's what brought our attention to it, was the fact that we think about 90%, if not more, of the cars are passing it easily because of the efficiency of the new vehicles. So that was the base reason for looking at it.
Now, Representative McLean stressed they have not committed to doing any of this yet. They're just talking about a lot of ideas. But the cap-and-trade part is a bit more eye-catching. Now, if that idea sounds familiar, it's probably because the legislature tried to pass a version of it in both 2019 and 2020, which triggered the infamous Republican walkouts, grinding the legislature to a halt until Democrats agreed to drop it. The idea is that the state places an upper limit on carbon emissions statewide. That's the cap. And the amount is divided into units for distribution to businesses, essentially serving as allowances to emit certain amounts of carbon pollution. Now, the cap is lowered over time and the pool of allowances shrinks, which is supposed to push companies to adopt more sustainable practices. Companies that reduce their emissions faster can bank their unused allowances for future years or sell them to other companies that pollute more. That's the trade part. Now, those previous failures to pass a program prompted former Governor Kate Brown to create her own version through executive action, resulting in the Climate Protection Program, or CPP. It was not smooth sailing for that version either. The initial rules were challenged in court and thrown out, and a new set of rules was only finalized last year. The CPP is set to take effect this year. So, with all that history behind cap-and-trade, it was quite the surprise to see the legislature wading back in, particularly for environmental advocacy groups who helped craft the new CPP rules.
So if you were to ask that coalition that worked really hard last summer to try and get these rules right, they'll tell you, we got it done. And we got it done in a way that makes sure that frontline communities, that groups like OGT represent, to make sure that, the brunt of pollution doesn't just continue disproportionately harm those communities, but the investments from CPP were there to right historic wrongs. So we're kind of confused as to why we're having this conversation about cap and trade when we spent all this time making sure that CPP was done right.
The memo didn't say much about why cap and trade is back on the table, and we didn't really get a clear answer from McLean. But here's what we've heard. First of all, businesses are not thrilled with the CPP. When we reached out to the state's largest business advocacy group, Oregon Business and Industry, they made it clear they really don't like this version of cap and trade in particular, telling us in a statement that the CPP, quote, threatens significant cost increases for businesses and consumers, imposes a draconian and inflexible emissions reduction schedule, does not align with other existing carbon markets, and is subject to little oversight from the legislative branch. They went on to say that they've been advocating for years for the CPP to be reformed or replaced. And that bit about not aligning with other existing carbon markets, that's the other factor here. Washington passed its own version of cap and trade in 2021, and it took effect in 2023. Linking the two states' carbon markets would provide more flexibility for businesses. And while the memo from Gorsuch and McLean is pretty brief, it does say that any potential CPP replacement would be designed to create that link. Even so, reopening cap and trade is going to be a touchy discussion. The memo also mentions that state revenue generated by the new cap and trade program could be spent in part on, quote, gas and diesel generated credits dedicated to the state highway fund for core operations and major projects. And that sentence immediately set off alarm bells for environmentalists.
If we put climate policy in place in the state, it has to be in service of addressing the climate crisis. Right now, households are paying a lot for climate impacts, right? Increasing heat means people are trying to scrape together air conditioning units, and air conditioning units can be really expensive to run because they can be really inefficient. Meanwhile, the state isn't putting dollars right now towards incentivizing very efficient heat pumps. And so if a climate program is put in place and resources are generated, they need to go back to addressing the root cause of the problem and help people transition off of the use of fossil fuels. Right now, what we saw rolled out, in just a couple of short bullet points last week was a proposal to use climate proceeds on projects that could actually increase emissions. And that's incredibly backwards.
Now, the memo also mentions the funds could be spent on community-based climate impact programs along the same lines as the CPP, plus wildfire mitigation efforts and support for transportation like biking and mass transit. But without an actual bill or package, we don't really know how serious this cap and trade discussion is or how it could fit into the broader transportation funding issue. There's still no official timeline for the package, but we are expecting some kind of update on Wednesday morning. The memo adds that there will be a fully transparent and public process that will help refine the proposals. But boy, will that have to be quick since there's only a few weeks left of the session. So I know that was a lot, but what do you think? Should cap and trade come back to potentially help fund transportation? Or maybe you just have thoughts about an increase to the gas tax and other fees. Let us know. Email the story at kgw.com or call and leave a voicemail, 503-226-5090.